think we'll see that the music today is very supportive of the talk. Spirit in the shadows. Don't forget that one. There's a story told of a wealthy man who really had enough money that he could buy or do virtually anything he wanted. But he found himself full of worry and unsettled. And so he'd heard about a sage in a neighboring village. So he left the city that he was living in, and he went on a quest to find the spiritual sage. And indeed, he found him in a hut in this small village. And he explained to the sage his situation. And the sage said, "Come back tomorrow at this time, and I'll tell you the secret to everlasting happiness and a sense of ease and fulfillment in life." And so the next day, the wealthy man shows up at the sage's hut, and he finds the sage on his hands and knees. And he says, "Did you lose something?" And he said, "Yeah, I dropped a ring, and I'm trying to find it." And the wealthy man immediately gets down on his hands and knees, and he's looking for the ring. And after quite some time and not finding the ring, the wealthy man says to the sage, "Where exactly did you drop the ring?" He goes, "Oh, I dropped it in the hut, but it's dark in the hut. I thought it'd be much easier to find out here." And the man looks at him rather questioningly. "So you dropped it in the hut, but we're looking for it out here?" And the sage looks him right in the eyes and says, "And that is the solution to your problem." How many of us have been guilty of falling trapped to the belief that happiness is something that we're surely going to find out there, right? I mean, am I the only one? I mean, when I think of the money I would have saved, if I would have just known that really the source of happiness is something that comes from deep within us. Oh, sure, there's lots of catalysts out there for it, but it's an inner journey to happiness. And the story tells us a secret as to why we keep getting lulled into thinking it's out there, when it tells us that the hut was dark. For you see, our egos are working to keep us thinking it's out there. There's a huge amount of momentum. Even I find myself thinking, "Oh, if I just had that." After all the years of meditating and work I've done, that ego lulls me in again, because you see, it's not wanting us to go into the dark of our consciousness. It's not that our whole consciousness is dark, but in the shadows, there'll be hurt, woundedness, disappointment, pain. And our ego just doesn't think we have the capacity to be there. I love the song, though, because Spirit is in the shadow. Spirit's there to work with us in the shadows, in the dark. So, today we're going to look at happiness. And how do we find lasting happiness? And let's start out by just exploring happiness. If we look at, remember how we say we are spiritual beings having a human experience? Well, happiness is a human experience. Not that humans are the only ones that can experience happiness, but in the range of things, we experience happiness as human beings when our the things we desire, manifest in our lives, or when life conforms to our attachments, to the way we think life should go, then we feel happy. Happy is circumstantial. And the challenge with that is that while everything can come together to make you happy in this moment, the circumstances can change. It's a bummer, isn't it? And then what do we have? Well, then we're unhappy. And like the gentleman, the wealthy man, we're maybe feeling disappointed, we're feeling frustrated, we're worried. Happiness comes and goes. And so when the ego puts us on a quest for happiness, there's no ultimate place of happiness. The other thing about then trying to be happy is inherent in not being satisfied with the moment is we're not in the moment. If you notice that the ego wants to take you on to, if we just had, or remember the good old days. But it doesn't like to land here in this moment. And so then we're deprived of all the support of our nature, of our true nature, which brings in so many capacities and so much support for living life. And so Brene, we're working with Brene Brown's book, The Gift of Imperfection. She points out that there's a quality of scarcity in chasing happiness. We can be wealthy, but because we don't feel any sense of support in that wealth, we're working hard to hold on to it, or we don't know when enough wealth is enough wealth. We're always dissatisfied, and we're worried that someone's going to take it from us, or we're not going to know how to hold on to it. We suffer in that disconnection. In my research for this talk, I ran into a writing by the Reverend Charles Lely. Charles was a Unity minister. In fact, he might still be alive. He was ordained in 1968, and he immediately went to work for Unity Village in their publishing department. He was an editor. And he is considered to be one of the first that wrote about the fact that you can trust the unfolding of your life. You see, in the Unity that I grew up in, it was all about you need to get clear on what you want this life to be, right? And if you get clear and if you never think a negative thought, then your life will be a bowl of cherries. Right. And yeah, there's divine order. But that divine order was just in the unfolding of what you wanted. You have to be patient because it's going to happen according to God's time. Now listen to what Charles Lely says. This, by the way, is my soulmate, really. I've felt very alone in Unity till I met Charles. Perhaps life is not meant to be a continual bowl of cherries, but rather an opportunity for developing our roots or our foundation for higher responsibilities, for bringing forth something beyond what we even imagine, with their co-committant capacity for greater joy. It's key that he brings in the word joy. Because you see, when that great sage says, I'm going to give you the key to lasting happiness, he's pointing to joy. And let's see if we can't tease that out a little bit. What's joy? Well, in comparison to happiness, joy is a quality of your Christ nature, of your true nature. In that, when you're experiencing joy, you're experiencing a state of being. It's not dependent on circumstances. Have you had the experience? Joy, by the way, is a heart quality. Have you had the experience of stepping out in some alignment with your love, with your passion, with something that's true for you, and it not going the way you thought it was going to go? And maybe there's utter chaos and there's all sorts of not knowing, but when you pause, by golly, you're still joyous. Why? Because you've aligned with something that's true for you. Something in you is coming forth. Something in you is being called out into the world. And the amazing thing is usually you're damn happy. Lasting happiness. Brene Brown quotes Adela Rogers St. John's. Joy seems to me a step beyond happiness. Good start. Happiness is a sort of atmosphere you can live in sometimes when you're lucky. Well put. Joy is a light that fills you with hope, faith, and love. Heart qualities. And you see, unlike happiness, which is fleeting, when we connect with our true nature, there is a support in every power and every quality that comes forth. Joy helps us break out of the mundane that the ego tends to lull us into, and invites us to align with our hearts. Our whole theme this year is choose love over fear. And we're starting out with how do you live a wholehearted life? We begin the process of unleashing our joy. Because joy shines light in the areas we've been afraid to look. Supports us coming forth. Rachel's nodding her head. Rachel is stepping out into some alignment with truth in her life. So, and I forgot. I'm going to go back and do this quote anyway. I told Colleen, Spirit doesn't seem to want me to do this quote because I keep running it over. So, remember I talked about the scarcity, and I want you to just hear what Eric Butterworth had to say about, well, actually, I'm sorry, not yet. Take it down. I just got a take as to how to use this. I don't know, Spirit works in mysterious ways. So how do we unleash joy? Because you see, joy is a quality of our true nature. And the interesting thing about qualities of our true nature is you can't will them into action. We have to look at what blocks them, and we often then have to develop our capacity in our soul to allow them to happen. So what's the block to joy in us? Well, interestingly enough, it's wanting something different than what we have right now. Do you see how that takes us out of the moment, takes us out of disconnection? How many of you right now are wishing that you had something different than you have right now? Like, would you hurry up and get to the point? I mean, it's just so easy to get out of the point. The moment can be very challenging and frustrating, right? But when we can stay with what is, then we open up to finding the blessing in everything that's happening. And so how do we do that? Well, Brene very beautifully says through the practice of gratitude. Isn't it interesting that And if you're familiar with the different practices of gratitude, like one of the ones that I like to practice, and I practiced for years, was getting a gratitude journal. And every night before I went to bed, in fact, the gratitude journal was on my nightstand, and I did it before I went to bed. I would list out however many I could, 10, 20 things I was grateful for. Well, rarely do you put down, well, I'm grateful for that thing that's going to happen, when life finally becomes my bowl of cherries. No, you're being asked, what are you grateful for today? And it has this great process of bringing you back into the moment. Right back into the moment. Even if it's not this moment, it takes you right back into the moment of what happened. It starts to orient you towards, hey, I can be in the moment. It's okay. And in fact, there's something to be grateful for in the moment. Lots of different gratitude. I think there's probably gratitude journals in the bookstore. You can also do gratitude prayers, gratitude meditations. There's several of you that I know are like me. When we get older, I often just say out loud, thank you, God, when I remember something that I would have forgotten. Just recognize the gratitude, right? And then what we see is that gratitude then comes up and supports us. In its many different ways of supporting us, in breaking out and living our truth. Eric Butterworth Spirit is so good. Says we have a choice to be great or small. When we're grateful, we're great. When we become lax in the expression of gratitude, we become little people with little minds leading little, inconsequential lives. Yeah, amen. Because remember I told you, the ego is very good at lulling us into, if only. And then what happens is we are out of the moment. We don't have the support. Another heart quality is courage. We start living a smaller life, just like the wealthy man, full of anxiety, unsettled, never getting to just enjoy the blessing of life. Isn't it funny? Have you noticed how when you really orient towards joy and happiness, it's the little things that bring you so much joy, so much happiness? So I have a word of caution, though. Joy, as with many other qualities of spirit, can bring up a lot of vulnerability in us. Because you see, all qualities of spirit align with the truth. And so if we're not living our truth, when we unleash these qualities, they're pointing towards the truth. And it can make you feel pretty anxious. I'll tell you just a fun story. Well, it wasn't so fun in the moment. Probably sadly set a direction in my life that I wish I would have known what I know today. So when I was 13, I threw a party. I'd like to say that I threw a party for my friends, but I didn't really have friends. I had acquaintances. I was in that weird place of not being understood by the people that probably could have been my good friends. And so I was hanging out with a group of people that would accept me, which were, usually they were pretty smart, they were a little nerdy, they were fringy on the, edges. So I invited, 12 or 15 of them over. We had a really fun house with, it was a fall party, we were out in the pool. But I invited one guy that didn't fit into the group. He was a great athlete. He was incredibly creative in school. We had a couple of classes together. I was really impressed with what he came forward with, his projects and his talks. And he was definitely, what would you call it, the A group? Do you know what I mean? Sort of the in group. That would have been another, he was in the in group. But what was cool was, unlike most of the boys in the in group, he never gave me a hard time. But here's the clincher. I had a major crush on him. Oh my God. I don't know what got into me. I mean, think of the courage it took to invite him. I didn't really even know him. I mean, we were in class together. He probably knew my name. I certainly knew his name. But I invited him. Kind of didn't even expect him to come, right? So I'm in the pool. We had quite a large patio. We had a very big, entertaining house. So he was probably. So what happened was, I see him walk onto the patio, which is the way you sort of entered the backyard, and I was suddenly flooded with joy. Be careful. I'm surrounded by a group of these acquaintances, and I said, "There's Chris. I love this guy. I think he's the greatest guy." And the pool gets very quiet. You know, today, no one would think anything of it today. Back then, when would that have been? I was 13, so that was in the early 70s. No, in the early, if I was born in, early 70s, sorry. Early 70s. And then there was the shaming, right? That's the hardest part. That's kind of weird. Guys don't say that about other guys. You know, and all of a sudden, so joy has sort of a breaking out energy, right? It wells up inside of you. And I'm working to get it back down in the box, right? And it shut me down. Like, he showed up at my party. And I said hi to him, I'm sure. I know I said hi to him. I'm sure I tried to make some small talk. But I could have been much more open-hearted, right? I'm so glad you came. I really have appreciated being in class with you. I think you really do some creative and interesting stuff. I'm glad you're here. And that's the kind of engagement that we see movies about, right? Where quite surprising things can happen. So Brene beautifully says, if you're going to unleash joy through gratitude, you also need to develop your capacity to be vulnerable. Because the truth will be carried by the joy. And sometimes the truth is a little surprising to us, or we're not quite ready. Or at least we don't think we are. Remember, the Bible tells us that Spirit is no respecter of men. Spirit propels you to the light, not asking you when you're ready to be the light. And joy is an incredible vehicle to ride to the truth. I want to close with a quote by Brene. There's one guarantee. If you're not practicing gratitude and allowing yourself to know joy, we are missing out on the two things that will actually sustain us during the inevitable hard times: joy and gratitude. Namaste.